Week 5 begins tonight in the NFL as we have the Los Angeles Rams taking on the Seattle Seahawks. In this video, we're going to discuss what the outlook of tonight's game may look like and which team may have a major advantage over the other. So let's get into the video. Tonight, the Seattle Seahawks are at home against the Los Angeles Rams, which I believe gives them a huge advantage because they have one of the craziest and most passionate fan bases called the 12. And the stadium literally was architecturally designed to be a loud stadium. They literally have a huge advantage every time they play at home, and that fan base is absolutely insane. However, this Rams offense is going to be a huge problem tonight, and I think is going to give them a huge advantage over the Seattle Seahawks because if we look at the 4 games the Seahawks have played so far, they've given up over 300 passing yards in 3 out of the 4 games, and in the other game they didn't throw for 300, the Colts, Carson Wentz still threw for 257 yards. So they're giving up a lot of passing yards per game, and the passing game is what's been the strongest point for this Rams offense this year, and it's been one of the best in the entire NFL. Matt Stafford gets a lot of flack because of his time in Detroit, despite always being on a bad team. And then people are like, oh, well, he had Calvin Johnson for a few years. They should have been able to win. Yeah, those were his best years, to be honest. And you know what? When there's only 2 players on the team, it's pretty easy to limit an offense. And you know what? They can play defense either. So I think that the negativity that surrounds Matt Stafford is unfair because it's not his fault that the Lions were always terrible. And he still put up great numbers every single year. And now he's on a good team, and we're seeing what he could really do. And it's been very impressive, I would say. I mean, if we look at his stats so far for the season, he's thrown for almost 300 yards every single game. Week 1 against the Bears, 321 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Week 2 against the Colts, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. And that was his worst game of the season. 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 pick is his worst game of the season so far. Week 3 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, one of the strongest defenses in the entire NFL. However, they are hurt in the secondary, so that does, help the Rams out a little bit in that scenario. But that's still a very talented pass rush that they had. And Matt Stafford just picked them apart. He threw for 343 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Huge game from him there. And then last week against the Cardinals, the Rams suffered their first loss. The Cardinals defense is, I would say very impressive. I mean, you saw what they could do week 1 against the Titans when Chandler Jones alone had 5 sacks. So it's a talented defense, especially a talented pass rush. Matt Stafford still threw for 280 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. So that means he's on the season already has 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns to only 2 picks. He's having a great season. And he's played against some pretty tough defenses. If you look at the teams they played the Bears, tough defense. They played the Colts. The Colts have a decent defense. They played the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers have a good defense. They played the Cardinals. The Cardinals have an all-right defense, I would say. Their secondary kind of lacks, similar to the Buccaneers, but I'd say the Buccaneers, talent-wise, have better linebackers and stuff. So that's why I'm going to say the Buccaneers were a harder defense than the Cardinals, obviously. So they played against some pretty tough defenses. I think Seattle's defense might be the weakest they've played so far, and Seattle's secondary has been one of the worst so far this season. If we look at what the Seahawks have done this year, just like how Matt Stafford's thrown for almost 300 yards per game, the Seahawks defense has allowed pretty much almost 300 yards per game passing for opposing teams. Week 1 was the only week they didn't allow 300 yards, and let's just say Carson Wentz still threw for 251 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no picks. That's not a bad game at all for a quarterback. I mean, Carson Wentz did throw the ball 38 times, so they were able to limit it. But it still wasn't a great performance from their defense, passing wise, I should say. They were able to stop the run, which is huge. But they weren't able to stop the passing game. And then, we look at week 2, the Seahawks played the Tennessee Titans. They let Ryan Tannehill throw the ball for 347 yards. He had no touchdowns and no picks, but he didn't need it because the Seahawks also gave up 35 carries to Derrick Henry for 182 yards and 3 touchdowns. Derrick Henry absolutely took over that game. But let's not forget, they still gave up 347 yards to Ryan Tannehill, who I do think has become a much better quarterback. But I think we could all agree that Matt Stafford is much more talented and a much more aggressive thrower of the ball. So, again, I just want to see what, Matt Stafford could do. And then we go against the Minnesota Vikings, a game where Seattle played pretty bad this year. It was maybe their worst game they've played as a whole team. And they gave up again 323 yards and 3 touchdowns with no interceptions to Kirk Cousins. A great game from Kirk Cousins. Again, a quarterback I would say that Matt Stafford is probably better than. And then last week, the Seahawks had a pretty strong showing against a tough team in the 49ers. However, the 49ers had their quarterback get hurt in the middle of the game, and they had to put in a rookie quarterback. Both quarterbacks that the 49ers played last week threw for over 150 yards, which means, again, the Seahawks gave up over 300 passing yards for the third game or the third time this season. I just don't see what the Seattle Seahawks defense is going to be, or how they're going to be able to stop this Los Angeles Rams offense, because this Rams offense is literally built off Matt Stafford in the passing game, and that is the weakest point of this Seattle team. Now, I understand that the Seahawks have Russell Wilson, and I think Russell Wilson can keep them in any single game. But this is not one of those standard teams that has a great offense and then a bad defense. The Rams' defense is probably still one of the top in the league. They have struggled this season, but I mean, you have the Defensive Player of the Year, who I feel like has been the Defensive Player of the Year for the last 5 years on their defensive line, and Aaron Donald. And they have a cornerback that most people say is probably the best cornerback in the league right now, and I'd probably say so myself. I can't think of anyone better than him right now, in Jalen Ramsey. So again, it's not like that Rams defense is really, the weak point for that for the Rams team in general. So it's not going to be easy for Russell Wilson to score as many points as I think Matt Stafford and the Rams offense can. I really think if the Seahawks want to win this game, they're going to have to be in a shootout, and I just don't know if the Rams defense is going to allow that. I mean, last week we saw the Rams defense really struggle against the Cardinals. However, it wasn't really in the passing game. Kyler Murray had one of his, I wouldn't say it was a bad game for Kyler Murray because he actually played very efficiently, but it was one of his lowest yardage per game games because he didn't need to throw the ball that much because, the Cardinals offense was just dominating, and they were just dominating as a team in general. And the way we were able to see, that Cardinals offense really excel against this Rams defense was in the running game, and especially Chase Edmonds. Chase Edmonds had 12 carries for 120 yards, which means he was averaging 10 yards per carry. James Conner had 18 carries for 50 yards, so they were able to limit him a little bit. However, he's the power back, and he was able to get into the end zone twice for the Cardinals. And it was just that I don't know if the Seahawks are up to the same level as the Cardinals offense is, just because the Cardinals offense is able to establish a running game, which I don't think the Seahawks have been able to do once this season. I mean, they had a pretty decent rushing game against the Colts when Chris Carson had 16 carries for 91 yards. But I'm going through it right now. I don't think he had 13 carries for 31 yards against the Titans. 12 carries for 80 yards, so he had a pretty good game against the Minnesota Vikings, but they were down in that game, so he didn't get that many attempts. He probably could have gone over 100 yards if he had his normal amount of carries. But they really, it seems like they really haven't been able to get an offensive running game going, and the only team that's really been able to, shock this Rams defense, I would say, this year is the Cardinals, and the Cardinals had a really strong running game. So I think that if the Seahawks want to have success tonight, they're going to have to do something similar. And we're going to see what happens tonight. I personally think that the Rams are either going to blow out the Seahawks or they're going to score. It's going to be like a 50-40 game. I really do. I think tonight you could definitely expect an offensive explosion from the Rams offense. I mean, that the Seahawks defense has the capability to be good. I mean, they have great players. They have Bobby Wagner. They have Jamal Adams. They have a good team, just like how the Rams have two great players. I would say the Seahawks have two great defensive players as well. But just as a whole, the defense of the Seahawks has not been able to put it together this year. Maybe they could do it tonight. I just don't see it happening, especially with one of their best players, Jamal Adams, being a safety that struggles in coverage, which is not – safety is supposed to be there for helping coverage. I feel like that's his main priority, and Jamal Adams plays more like a linebacker, and, that's fine, but I just don't see how this if this Seahawks defense has played like they have through the first 4 weeks, and granted, any team could turn it around at any time. It's the NFL. They're all talented players. They have great schemes and everything, so they could turn around at any time. I just don't see them doing it against a talented Los Angeles Rams team, especially this loaded offense that the Rams have. Matt Stafford is wheeling and dealing right now. But that's my personal thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think it's going to be a blowout? Like, I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but do you think the Rams are going to walk away with this game because of their offense, or do you think it's going to go a different way? Let me know in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed the video, it would be a huge help if you guys could leave a like, comment, subscribe, whatever one you want. It really helps out the channel. And have a great day.